Afternoon to you all. You are all welcome again to this afternoon session on database modeling and design with SQL. So from the last session, we're looking at how to derive entities and attributes and create some relationships among the entities. Today we'll be looking at a few data modeling techniques and some tools that we could use to create our models. So quickly, I'll just go through what we did from last time. We are still at the conceptual design stage where we work with three main components: the entities, the attributes, and the relationships. So last time we took a company scenario, we were able to identify the entities, quite a number of them, but we wanted to focus on four main entities: the employees, the job roles, the departments, and the projects. But as I said, depending on the kind of organization that you are working for, there could be other entities identified. Then we look at the attributes that the entities would have for employees and for departments. Then we created a number of relationships among those entities. We said that the employees work in departments, the employees are assigned job roles, the employees work on projects, departments control projects. We're able to create relationships among all the entities. So none of them was standing alone or was a loner in this case. So let's look at some techniques. We'll start with data dictionary. Some data modeling techniques. A data dictionary looks like this. It's a tabular representation of the data assets. So it gives you the table. You can't hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. So the tabular, it gives a representation of the tabular data with all the columns, the data type, whether they are nullable or whatever description or comments you have for a particular table or database that you are creating. So the core elements in the data dictionary is the data sets and the tables, the attributes of the columns. You could add the description, those ones are optional. Then you could create the, identify the relationships that exist among or between the tables, and then whatever other constraints that are identifiable, like the uniqueness, the key constraint, the default values, and all of that. Some people think this is too textual and it's more like you are documenting what you are going to do in the database. So some people don't like this data dictionary approach. So this now leads us to another type of approach, which we call the UML class diagrams. It looks like this. It's visual. It gives you a visual depiction of how the entities are linked to each other. And so it gives you the entities, the attributes. Then one peculiar thing about the UML is it gives you the methods, or what you call the behaviors or the operations that those entities would perform. Then it looks at the relationships also. UML generally is a standardized family of notations which is used for modeling and designing of information systems. Okay, but it works the same way as the entity relationship diagrams, but this is mostly used in object-oriented programming, where maybe people are programming in Java or C# or that kind of thing. So most of the times, the system developers use class diagrams they use UML class diagrams to model the kind of systems that they are developing. So in class diagrams, the architects will define the classes, which is the same as or similar to entity. They have the attributes with the data types, then the methods or the behaviors, then the relationships that exist amongst them. Yeah. Then the third technique is the entity relationship diagrams, which we'll be focusing on most of the time. This is a representation of how the entity relationship diagram looks like. It also has the entity. Each entity has the attributes, then the lines that connect them shows the relationships among each of them. So this is the default technique for modeling and the design of relational databases. Over here, in the entity relationship model, the data architect identifies the entities which represents the objects, the attributes of those entities, then the relationships that connect or are associated with those entities. You realize that I keep mentioning these three items, the entities, the attributes, and relationships. In data modeling, that's the basic thing you need to know to come out with some good data. If you're able to identify this, that's a good step. But if you're unable to identify these three main things, then from the start, your data might end up being inaccurate or faulty or not so much structured. Okay, so here this work basically with any kind of tabular data because it gives you a visualization of the database schema and it gives a top level view of the data that you want to model. Well, so we'll continue with the entity relationship diagram, looking at some tools that could be used for that. The first of the tools that I decided to share with you was the basic pen and paper. So you can just use your pen and paper to model your data and it will be all right. You could use it for anything. So this is one that I did for the company scenario that we looked at. So with the company scenario, we identified the employee. We said the employee works in the department, is assigned a job role, the employee works on a project, and the department controls the project. There are two diagrams that I've done here. I prefer the top one. The bottom one is quite academic. So in textbooks, cross textbooks, you find the bottom one. So a lot of people would prefer the bottom one, more like the students. But I think that in real applications, I'll prefer using the top one. It's quite simple. Yeah. So this is quick and fun. You could just draw, get paper and pen. Anybody can just do this very easy and easy to share by just posting on the walls. You could model your data and just post it. So anytime you look at it, you understand how your database is being modeled or how your database is working or is being structured. Yeah. But there are a few problems with this one. Maintaining this could be painful because anytime there's a new entity or there's a new attribute, you might have to draw the whole thing again. Or sometimes you want to rearrange the entities to make it not too clumsy, and you would have to end up drawing the whole thing several times. Sometimes if the person who is drawing the handwriting is not very good, it might not be readable. And maybe sharing this thing digitally too would not be good because you'd only have to take a picture and you can't collaborate with people to work on it unless they are physically present with you. And this might not be good for large databases because if the database is large, you might have to draw a lot of diagrams or entities, and that would mean that you need a very large paper to be able to do that. So, but in normal standard databases, you could do this. Some people, even if they would use the software tool, they would want to start with this paper and pen method just to have an idea of what data they are modeling before they start with the software. Okay, so let's move on to the modeling and diagramming tools. They can model the data to look like this. It is the same database or the structure that I looked at. That is the same thing I'm representing over here using another tool. Okay, so it still has the same entities and the attributes and the relationships. This one it gives rich modeling capabilities. It auto arranges the entities. So you can just drag the entities from one side to another side and the lines would just connect with it automatically. You don't need to do it one by one. It allows for easy online collaboration, especially those that run on the cloud. You can share your diagrams by exporting in PDF or in PNG or JPEG format and just send to your other collaborators. And it links to the data dictionary. So this one would generate a data dictionary just like we saw earlier on. It can give you that. But some of these tools might not have some database support. So what I'm trying to say, some of these tools allow you to connect this to your database. So by designing this, the system can create the database automatically for you by structuring your data, your model like this. But some tools do that, some tools don't. Some also do not have the link to the data dictionary, and some also don't handle the changes correctly. Examples of the tools that could help you to, or softwares that could help you to model or your data would be Visio, Microsoft Visio. Most of you are quite familiar with that. We have Lucid Chart, ER Studio, Erwin Data Modeler, and Visual Paradigm. I use Visual Paradigm for this. Visual Paradigm allows you to create this model, and you're able to connect to your database server. So even by doing this, you could just export or connect to your database, and it creates all the database with all the entities and the attributes in the database for you. Yeah. The third one is using database management tools. So this, I used PHP My Admin with MySQL Workbench to do this. So what I do is you create the database with all the tables and the data, and the DBMS would generate the diagram for you, would generate the model for you in this format. Yeah. So this one works well with the database. It handles the changes well. So anytime you make any change to the database, you could come back to this model and the model will affect the changes. So your models are always updated, reflecting what the actual structure is. But this one, because it's tied to the DBMS, it supports only one DBMS. But I'm not sure that should be a big issue, because if it's that DBMS you are using, then there shouldn't be a problem. But some also have some limited ER capabilities. And usually it requires creating the database before generating the model. That would be one thing that I'm not too, maybe people don't like about this, because you need to create the database and look at the structure and everything before this model be created. But most people would say that you need to create the model before you build the database here. So these tools are embedded in Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So anytime you are using or MySQL Workbench or Oracle SQL Developer, anytime you are doing that, you create your database in any of these DBMS, it would generate this design for you, this model for you. So, yeah. So this would give you the visual display of how your database looks like, rather than going into the database itself and everything is clumsy and complex. Yeah. So these are the three main tools. We looked at the paper and pen, the modeling and the diagramming tools, then the database management tools. But before then, we look at some techniques. We talked about the data dictionary. We talked about using the UML class diagrams, then the entity relationship model. Now, let me just share this with you. Yeah, this an ER and UML class diagram that we worked on for at the last session. Daniel talked about Enro and the work that we've been doing. So we were trying to model the database. This is one of the earlier models that we came up with. This went under several reviews to come up with the actual thing. So this we use visual paradigm over here. This is more of a UML class diagram than a typical ER model, even though we try to combine the two. So we make sure that the entities are there. Each entity has their columns or their attributes with their data type, the type of data that we want to store in each column or each attribute. Then with the constraints, whether there's a primary key or foreign key, I'll talk about that later. Then we looked at the operations that could be performed on them. This one person didn't sit down to do it. It was a collaborative work. So we had the product owners, we had the data architects, the customers, the developers, the scrum masters, all coming together, sharing ideas and coming up with this. So a lot of the times, you could have more complex models than this. People like to split their data models into smaller chunks. So they could only take one part and develop the model and create another one and just create a note to show that there's a link between one set and the other set. Some people want it one bulk in the whole. People think that is confusing if you do that kind of thing. So what I want to do is, based on the model that we created for the sample company, where we identified the entities and the attributes and the relationship. Remember earlier when I said that that is not a straitjacket model for all companies. Companies work differently. So maybe in your company, you could just come up with something, try and analyze the scenario, the environment that you work in, and see if you can come up with, you could identify the entities that work within your company. Then you could, if you could identify the attributes for each entity, and if you could look at the relationships that exist. So if you work in a hospital, you could do that for a hospital. If you are a pastor, you could do that for a church. If you're a teacher or you work in an educational environment, you could do that for the school or university that you work in. Maybe you could draw it on paper, you could share with the group. I could allow you to even share it with all the members in next week's presentation or something. I mean, it's a way where we all learn different things, yeah. So you could try it. If you have any problem, you can just link me up in the group and we'll look at it, we'll consider it. Yeah. So that would be what I want to share. I would like us to have some discussion and take some questions and feedback on this modeling that we've done. Let me look at the chat if there are any questions for me. But if you have any questions, you can go ahead with it or you can just put it in the chat.
Hi, Carlos, a question.
Yeah, okay.
Is this a one-time approach to modeling the data, or is iterative and continuously it will be updated?
It is very much iterative. So let me just go back to the one on enroll like this. So this was more like, I think, the second model that we came up with. But after this, the scope of the project that we're working on, or the solution that we're working on, had to change. We had to come back and take out some of the entities and bring in some new entities. So that is why that's why it's good if you are using a digital one, because it's always easy to come back and restructure your model or your design. Yeah. So this is very much iterative. You could always come up. And one thing about this is you could combine it with other tools. So you could design this and have the data dictionary alongside. Some people would like to have the paper and the digital one to both together. Yeah. So you could always go back and forth with it. Yeah.
Hello, Carlos. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Uwe.
No, after you, Kwame. I'll wait. You were on already, so I'll wait for you, Kwame. Go ahead. Finish.
Can someone use the same modeling approach to create a data field on Excel for migration? That's a question in the chat.
Yes. So as I said, the ER works with tabular data. So whether you are working on databases or Excel spreadsheet or CSV files or XML files, you could still use this approach to model the data. So you could model the data in this way, then you know each each sheet would have one entity. Each sheet would have one entity. Then you create the link between the various sheets within one workbook. Yeah, so you could do that in Excel also.
Right, Carlos.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Carlos and Kwame. I'm thinking, Carlos, can you please explain again the data dictionary thing?
Okay. Let me just go back to that. So this is the data dictionary. We are saying that it's a tabular representation of the data assets. What are the data assets? There are two main elements or core elements of the data assets. We talk about the entity, which is the table, then the attributes, which is the column. When you look at the image, the table or the entity is a person. This was derived from a database called AdventureWorks. It's a sample database that Microsoft makes available to learners to use. So in this table, there are several entities in this table, there are several attributes like the business entity ID, the person type, the name style, title, first name, middle name, last name, all of that. Each of these attributes have their data type, the type of data that will be stored over there. Then, so some are integers, some are characters, some are bits in binary form, 0 or 1. The null will show whether that field can be blank or it is required. Then you could have the description, because maybe not everybody will just see name style and understand what is there. So that would have the description. But the two main things are the tables and the columns, the entities and the attributes. All the other ones are optional elements, which would help anyone who looks at the database to be able to understand the structure of your database. When are you okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for that. But just
Okay.
so basically, from what you've explained so far, it means that when we're modeling data, since we're still at the conceptual design stage, it's better to use a model that is automatically something that updates itself. Yeah,
Yes,
so,
yeah.
because that makes more sense, saves time, saves everything. So if there's any increment in the company staff or variables have changed, you just go and input it and it automatically updates it. That is a preferable thing to do.
Exactly, yeah. So this one that I showed here, so obviously this paper model will not do that. You would have to come back to update it yourself when you make any changes to the structure of the database. Some of the tools that I shared here can do that. Visual Paradigm, I know because it links directly to the database, it can do how do you call it? Updating of the model. Yeah. This one does it best. This one, because this one you are creating the model right from the DBMS, it does that. Any change in the structure of the database will reflect in the model also. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me look at this question. It says, as the structure model is evolving, can normalizing tables present any issues? As the structure model is evolving, can normalizing tables present any issues on a live DB? Yes. Normalization comes in, it could alter the structure of the table. But normally it's better to normalize your tables before you build the database itself. But now, because we are seeing that the data, the process is iterative, you can always go back. So you'll be adding more things. So any new thing that you are adding will go through that normalization process. It usually wouldn't affect the structure so much. Maybe it will just add a new entity or a new column, or maybe change the data type of a particular column. Maybe if, let's say, an ID was only numeric, but the company has decided to add maybe a letter to it, you might want to change the data type and that kind of thing. That wouldn't affect the database no, really, it wouldn't affect the model. Yeah. Amma, I don't know if I've answered your question. There's one question also from Asada. Please, how many people did it take to design the new model? And how can one familiarize themselves with this model? Do you provide one-to-one sessions, please? Okay. So the new model, we're about, I think we're about 7 or 8, I think so. 7 or 8 who are working on that. And so what happens is someone is bringing the database and the database knowledge and the technical knowledge. The developers are also coming up with what they think they need to be implemented. The product owners would also bring their ideas, and the customers will also bring in their ideas of how they want or what kind of data they would want to be collected. So about 8 of them and all of that. How can we familiarize with this? Yeah, I provide one-on-one sessions on developing and modeling these kind of databases also. And I provide training on how to model databases like this too, yeah. So I do the modeling, I do the training on the modeling, mostly with the visual tool, the digital tools, yeah. Is there any generic ETL tools that support modeling? I would have to check on that. I'm not too sure if I can just come up with that off it. I would have to check on that. But if anyone knows any of the other tools that can support that, you could just add that to the chat. Do we have any more questions? Okay, if not, then I guess we would round up our session. Thanks to you all
for. Take a group picture today, Carlos.
Okay, we can do that.
It's been a while. I'm only here, so I think we should have some beautiful faces joining you.
Sorry, please. Before we take the pictures, I've just sent in a question. Apologies, please.
Okay,
I'm just joining a bit late. Is this recording going to be available, please?
Yes, this session is being recorded. Yeah.
Okay. How can I have it, please?
So there's a WhatsApp group that the link has been posted in the chat. So you can join that. Normally we post the link to the videos, the recorded videos, and the slides for the sessions in the chat.
Okay.
So you could have access to it. Yeah.
Is that the Agile Transformation Group chat?
Exactly. That's the
right. Okay. Thank you so much.